The globalist agenda works in such a manner of either they predict the future or they create the future that they want to control.
This BlackRock guy, his company has over $10 trillion in management.
Yeah.
Big
But
money.
now they're coming out bare knuckle.
Yeah.
And of course, when we look at Uganda, for example, as a nation, and we look at where our economy is, when we had people flying in from the US to expose and say, look, when you read the fine print of some of the T's and C's of these grants, so all the sectors in the fine print, there has to be inclusivity and inclusion. You have to have acceptance of things to do with climate change. I think that's the environment aspect of ESG.
Whereas the church is focusing on the means rather than the goal. If you want to understand exactly who the person is, don't look at the means. Look at the end goal of what they are pursuing.
Help me understand my responsibility in the face of these mega global powers that have all the money. Hi, and welcome to the Circle of Life, a space that's dedicated to helping us thrive in every area of our lives. Now, God has such amazing plans for each and every one of us. But we all know that we have an adversary who is hell-bent on inhibiting us from realizing a God-ordained destiny. Now, one of the ways he does this is through very subtle ways. And one such way is through what we call a global agenda. Looks progressive on the surface, but is inclined to inhibiting us from realizing our potential and from acting as a clawback to our God-given freedoms. So today we want to dig deeper into what this global agenda really is. And most importantly, to really understand what our role is. Now, to help us do that are two very amazing guests who I can't wait for you to meet, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves. How would you like the world to know you? I'll start with you, Evelyn.
Hello. Thank
Hi,
you so
Evelyn.
much for this invite to be here.
Yeah.
My name is Eva Mugisa. In some circles, I'm known as Dr. Eva Mugisa.
Dr. Eva
And that's
Mugisa.
because I'm a pharmacist by training,
Okay.
proprietor with Evetha Pharmacy, Chiwatule, and we do community pharmacy as well as some innovation in my personal time. I'm a cosmetic formulator with a school in the UK. So we're looking to topple some of these global trends and the influencers with the stuff that is actually not good for us in the healthcare system. But I'm very, very excited to give you a few pointers on how it's going and what the Lord has been convicting me about with regard to your conversation.
Okay,
Thank you
we're
for the
excited
invite.
to have you here.
Thank you.
Mark, your turn.
Yeah. Where do I begin from? Well,
Give us a whole resume. We have the time.
my name is Mark Nasasira, Robai Hayo. I am a lawyer. I'm also a theologian. Studied theology, Bible student, so to speak. And I do a bit of political commentary, policy analysis, and I'm very much interested in global trends and where that is in regards to how we live our lives and where the church in relation to governance, theology, and the place of church in global trends and the dynamics that play in everyday life. Yes.
Awesome. We're in good hands, aren't we?
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. Now, let's start all things globalization. In response to President Donald Trump's recent trade tariffs, a couple of organizations, individuals, organizations such as World Bank, OECD, have reacted and argued that these tariffs are going to upend globalization. And more specifically, they're going to kind of like take back or destroy the benefits that we have gained from globalization all these years. Now, in your view, do you think, or rather, what are the real or perceived benefits of globalization, especially for a developing context such as Uganda?
Well, we certainly know that it's when the stone is thrown among the dogs, the one that yelps the loudest was hit.
Yeah.
So of course in these circles, when they do talk about how it's going to push them back a couple of years, then we know that there's something that is being jeopardized. And whenever we're talking about a globalist agenda, we know that it's not good. We know, for example, that there's a lot of overseas nations, I guess, including the US, that have benefited from, let's say, African resources, from our minerals, from our from so many things that we have. Not just there's so much that Africa has, yeah. And some of these tariffs are going to interfere with those financial flows, because you need money to set infrastructures at global level. You need money for legislation and policy development that is going to be adopted and pushed into nations. So definitely there's something that's at stake for them.
Okay.
And I think, though we don't see the full picture yet, let's fasten our seatbelts and enjoy the ride, because President Donald Trump is full of surprises.
He is full of surprises.
But I know that this is going to be a good one.
Yeah, sure. Mark?
First, I would like to break down the whole concept of globalization before, because the thing is, it is the reason that it gets easily jumped onto by unsuspecting people is because, like you said, it seemingly looks very nice and rosy and looks very attractive. But you see, the whole idea is, and even those who have tried to scratch the surface about globalization, the idea they have is this whole thing of an easy life that, you know, the whole world over. If I am in Uganda, it is easy for me to get out of Uganda and go to probably Eastern Europe or Americas, and life won't be very different. So they will throw around things like easy transactions, so you have a common currency. There's nothing like, you know, borders and all these things. We get rid of the borders, and I'm able to go everywhere that I want, and all these things that they bring. You know, the whole idea is that we have a uniform world where life is not different. How I live it in Kampala is the same way I would probably live it in any city in the Americas or in Europe. And that's roughly the idea. But that, when you look a little bit deeper than the surface, then it gives you the picture of to attain that, then you have to have a uniform kind of life. Then you have to have a curated kind of life for every other person, that you have a script. Literally, we are living off a script, that there is a particular script that has been laid out, which every other person has to live on. So the unsuspecting mind, or that does not scratch the surface, just barely the surface. And that is the whole picture that globalization paints. So when you look at it from a point where you don't want to be really proactive and dig deeper, it looks nice. It sounds good. Because, and that's a catch point.
So it looks like you're leaning into the underlying, or that the undertones that globalization is not really telling us. That's what you're shooting at, straight at.
No, but you see, what I'm trying to say, for starters, what you look at, or what is being sold as globalization, is a simple life. Life has been simplified. Now, when you go about the tariffs that Trump put, and the talk about, you know, the negative talk about the tariffs and all that stuff, and people were talking about negatively about nationalism and all this, and he comes and he says America first and all these things, and they're against the global agenda and the globalist agenda. And of course, it's not about rhetoric. One of the things that brings out the real thing about nationalism and America first, I would think, would be for America to demand a fair share. And the fair share is in the tariffs, because the tariffs were actually what Trump was doing was, how you treat us is how we're going to treat you. And that's the whole gist of the tariffs. If you are charging such and such a tax on commodities from America, we will do the same to yours. And so for me, I have no problem with an American president putting America first, because ideally that's what it should be. It is the duty of other presidents.
So nationalism is a noble thing, right? And what you're saying is that in Trump's mind, the nationalistic agenda is meant to curb the evil agendas that these capitalists, the superpowers or the global powers actually have. And they're just trying to seep it in through the simplistic life that you referred to, that is globalization.
Absolutely. Because you see, for me, the strength of the human race is our diversity.
Yeah, that's true.
So the whole idea that we want to be uniform and have a uniform, I mean, look at a human being even if you're twins, you're the size this year, you wouldn't have the same
They're
DNA.
different.
Right?
Very different.
You wouldn't have the same. And that's how God designed us. Even if you shared the womb and you're born at the same date, we are different.
Yeah.
And that's how God created us. But then you have an idea that is being peddled around that you want to have all human beings uniform.
Can be achieved, especially since God did not intend it to be so. And now that we speak of God, I'd love for us to take this global agenda discussion even further by watching a clip that was a prophecy given by Prophet Elvis Mbonye in 2018 about the year 2020, about the evil global agenda. Let's take a look.
There's certain things the Spirit of God was showing me last night. And then He told me to tell you to start preparing. To start preparing for the time which He has set. He started to show me certain things that would happen. And He started to show me especially the year 2020. I saw secrets of the governments of this world. And I saw them in unison, working hand in hand, behind the scenes, trying to bring about things. And the year 2020 was marked out when they want all things in control, to submit them to the God of this world and say, now, here is your world.
Right. So Prophet Elvis says that he saw governments working in unison, trying to bring the world under the control of the enemy. And he marked out the year. This prophecy was given in 2018. And he marked out the year being 2020. Now that we all know what happened in 2020, it's creepy what he said, right? What are your thoughts on that in relation to the global agenda that evolved, that we all saw, what happened in 2020 and how that is playing out in our day-to-day life now?
You know, 2020 stands out for me in many ways, because being a medical worker, that was like the biggest, the most trying and most challenging period that we had. Not just myself, but the entire medical fraternity, because the highlight of 2020 was, of course, the pandemic, SARS-CoV-2. Now, without, of course, getting so deep into that, some of the things that stood out was that there seemed to be the protocols for management that were put out were adopted at global level. First of all, the highlight of 2020 being the pandemic meant that the entire world was affected. And when we look at the pathology of the sickness and how it spread and all of that, you'd be surprised that there were even lone islands somewhere in some oceans that were also affected. So we look at the coverage, it was at a global level. But when it also came to the protocols of management, they were protocols that were given to the entire world. So they came from the World Health Organization, and they were filtered down to different countries, governments, and we were told, to do this for emergency cases, then for home management, it was managed like this. But the interesting thing is that I actually tried to put those to use, and they weren't working particularly well. The protocols, you mean? The protocols that were given to us, we were not getting satisfactory results. And of course, hospital bills were heaping for many people. They could not meet oxygen and so many others, and people were just being sent home either to die or to recoup by the grace of God. So when I look back now and I saw the coverage and the way the instructions were given, and even the aftermath with words like, oh, this has happened, so let's build back better, build back better, build back better, build back. And you're thinking, build what back? From the medical standpoint, from the political standpoint, it seemed to be almost scripted.
Yeah.
From the coverage to the protocols to everything that, and from the outside, of course, our patients and people who are not within the medical and maybe these spaces of influence, you'd think, oh, they're looking out for us, which reminds me of what Mark said, that you think there's a sense of, there's actually a sense of care.
They care for you.
They care for us, you know. So let's do this, let's do the other. And you have some people who are honest, but they were honestly, I could say, being, taken advantage of, because I remember during that time, there was people who were hiking the prices of medications. There were people at the time who were hiking services.
How much was Covidex then?
Covidex started out at 5,000 shillings.
Yeah.
But there were people who are selling it at 50,000.
Yes, 70,000.
But even then, it was not recommended by the World Health Organization.
You see, the interesting thing is
It come from them.
The World Health Organization actually put out, they wanted a response to the initial stages of drafting of what they have as the World Pandemic Treaty. So I remember in the drafting stages, I know they've garnered some mileage with that, but in the initial stages, just after, in the COVID aftermath, they wrote to, they sent out, they give space for medics from all over the world to give responses to how we felt. So some of the points that we raised as the a few Ugandan doctors and myself, health workers, were that. But growing up, I remember that there was requirements. The schools were the same, the uniform in all the provinces. You know how big Russia is? Russia is like
Very
a
big.
continent, But from every part, they had what they called the Red Star, the Red Star. If you know the flag of the socialists, it's a red flag with a sickle and a star, a sickle and a hammer. But they also have what they had called a Red Star. So they had a Red Army. So everyone, like you had people from different parts of the USSR who were part of that army. The education system, the uniforms were the same. The states used to, like the labor, the salary scale was the same, whether you were a professor or you were a peasant. It was the same. Now there's a generation in my parents' time that are like, oh, those golden days, they were so good. We didn't have to, everyone was equal. We didn't have to, fend for ourselves so much. We were all the same. If you want salami and sausages, the butcher's shop is there. The state is the one that gives you the salami and sausages. So everyone was the same in that regard. But at the collapse of the Soviet Union, my mom's sister, she passed, both my mom and my sister passed away, but she wrote letters, and my mom was telling me that my mom had wanted to go back after the collapse, maybe like 1990, she wanted to go back. And her sister wrote to her and told her, stay where you are, because people here are jumping off 30-storied buildings. Because once the supply, people had gotten so used to having everything met that it was such a lazy attitude. Now, when capitalism came in and everyone had to level up, there were people who simply could not fit into the economy, into the social systems. So they were committing suicide by jumping off these really, really tall. Even the housing was communal. So that you see how we have apartments blooming everywhere, and we think, oh, now it's cool, it's urban planning, development. Not quite. There's something about owning a piece of land, which is actually spiritual, it's biblical, it's part of your heritage. Being able to grow your own food, build your own house, and not just being a statistic in a storied building of, 16 stories. And we have so much of that being adopted because it's quote unquote cool. The cool kids live in apartments with ACs and all of that. So there are very subtle ways into which this is being introduced. But I remember that when Mark was talking about it, and when I matched this with the post-COVID aftermath in 2020, I realized that there was attempts to resurface this, but then again, we saw that in the medical field, the protocols that actually helped people work were drugs that were later condemned.
Yeah.
Drugs such as ivermectin were then condemned. Journals in medical, publications that talked about the safety profiles of such drugs and their usage against the pandemic at the time, where most of those articles were retracted. You began to see censorship and retraction. Like yesterday, the article was there. Tomorrow it's retracted. It's not peer reviewed. It's not ABCD. So there was a trend that we saw. The warning that the prophet gave in this video, it precipitated, if I can use a scientific word, it crystallized and we actually saw it.
Yes.
But also the hope and the ray of hope that he gave, that the Lord is raising up people to counter this globalist movement. We began to see lockdowns being done away with.
Yes.
We began to see some of the quote unquote science being shown to be bad science, about masking, about some of the ridiculous extreme measures that were taken. They were being shown to be ineffective.
So before we get into that, I'd like for us to dig deeper into this global agenda aspect. You mentioned something about it being a God-ordained thing to own land.
Yeah.
Now, World Economic Forum, or should I say the chairman, what's his name, Klaus Schwab, right, is popularly known to have said, you will own nothing and be happy, right? So what's the agenda in all this, Mark, do you think?
First, that prophecy, of course, when he says the nations of, he saw the nations, in unison, working in unison to bring all the nations of the world, under control to hand them over to the God of this world. Then you see what exactly happened during COVID, and how one of the highlights for me that never goes away is how a tech company, tech, nothing medical to it, was able to censor and dictate to medical people, doctors, on what can be said about COVID, what can be said about medicine.
True.
It up to now, it baffles me how we got to that point.
True.
Because everything seemed like we were okay. We were in a world where there was freedom of speech and there was, we were all praising professionals, because before you'd speak, they'd ask, who are you? You talk about this topic as who? Even today in some circles, I mean, you'll hear them saying, you can't practice medicine without a license. But we had tech people, computers, software, dictating to medical doctors on what is medicine and what is not medicine.
Yeah.
So that was the epitome of control, subjugation. For 2 years, lockdowns, different voices saying, lockdowns are not it, and some saying it must be done. And so we had nations being squeezed into accepting. Those that did not were, of course, suffered the consequences of not listening. But thank God that he said in the prophecy that you are the salt of the world. There was still a remnant. And this whole thing got lulled back.
Yes.
And for me, I have watched another prophecy, a bit to go off the tangent, and in respect to Prophet Elvis Mbonye, I watched the prophecy about the asteroid that was coming close to Earth that was going to cause concern. The magnitude of these prophecies, sometimes that Prophet Elvis Mbonye has
NASA
given.
had not noticed it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like you have professional, and that's why I was saying that before you've had people saying, you talk about this as who?
As who?
Are you an astronaut? Are you do you know anything about space? Have you studied about space? But we've had some of these prophecies. When you go to his YouTube channel, Prophet Elvis Mbonye, and you look at some of those prophecies, it's mind-blowing. But for me, it's about when I say there was a remnant, thank God for remnant. Thank God for those that was still able to stand in the gap. And for me, Prophet Elvis, because when I relate it to that other prophecy of the asteroid,
Yeah.
and every other person that we say the glorified people of the world that were able to, should have known, should have seen.
NASA.
I mean, we could have, this whole thing could have been wiped out.
True.
Yeah.
And nobody else saw it, and he sees it years before it happens, and he prays about it.
Stops it.
And then
Crazy.
after that,
Yeah.
there is this. And he says, and we see something in the 2 years that we've never seen that changes the course of the world. Up to today,
Yeah.
there are things that changed because of that period that we went through that he talked about 2 years before it happened. So the whole idea of control and how fast it happened, and of course what we're talking about, the fight and the push to fight against nationalism and the diversity, and to have a common approach to whatever it is, whatever challenge that was being placed, is indicative of how the globalist agenda works. Because the globalist agenda works in such a manner of either they predict the future or they create the future that they want to control. And for the COVID and the in light with the prophecy, is that they created a future that they wanted, and created how best they could use it to control the world. And you see, when you bring it this other side and look at some of these prophecies, then you realize that even if the globalists do their best, there is always that remnant that makes a difference and controls or stops their onslaught.
Yes. Now, Mark, before we get into that remnant, we're going to have a conversation on that. I'd love for us to, there's something you said about the controls that were implemented in 2020, and those controls are still existent today. So people need to realize that much as COVID passed, there were controls that started then, and they're still running our lives up to today. One of those is the ESG. Now, to be honest, the first time I heard about ESG, it sounded really good.
Sounded like a car.
It sounded really cool. Sustainable. I mean, who doesn't want a sustainable business? But every now and then, the prophet has talked about the underlying evil agenda that ESG has, and finding how the world is beginning to catch up on that evil agenda. Now, I'd love for us to take a look at a very satirical piece that will take us deeper into what some of these global agendas really are about. Let's take a look.
Hey, I'm Brian. My pronouns are he, his, him. I understand you're looking for a small business loan, but you're having troubles with your ESG score.
I was denied.
What's your business?
I operate drilling equipment, oil and gas.
Uh-huh. The E in ESG is for environmental. You're in a dirty industry.
So I can't get no loan?
Well, let's take a look at your company's social policies. Tell me about your plan to create social justice.
Social justice.
Do your employees get paid time off for abortions? And tell me about your diversity, equity, and inclusion plan.
Well, I ain't got none of that. I'm a driller. I just hire good people to do the work.
Well, maybe there's one more thing we can check. Do you have any female co-owners?
No, just me.
Ooh, have you ever identified as a woman? Or even just non-binary? It could really help your score.
What?
Your loan is denied. Come back when you fix your ESG score.
The look on his face. Now, before we have a very short discussion on this, I'd love for us to watch another very short clip that was an interview that was given by Larry Fink. Now, Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock, and he is the main proponent of ESG. Here's what he had to say about why ESG is important.
You now make a point of that's an investment criteria for you.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year, and what we're doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted, okay?
We're doing the same thing.
And so it's just, you have to force behaviors. And if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said. And ultimately, it's still going to take time, but I am just as much shocked as Ken is that we have not seen more opportunities. And we're going to have to force change.
Right. So, Mark, Evelyn, this is Larry Fink, the proponent of ESG, and in his interview, he says, maybe he gives it to us, that the reason why they have ESG as a yardstick for whether to invest in your company or not is because they have to force behavior. And as the clip before showed us, one of the behaviors they're trying to enforce is what? Abortion.
Yeah.
LGBTQ, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
All through even during the COVID and the post-COVID period, there was, in maybe subtle ways, the whole aspect of behavioral change being pushed onto people. Now, of course, they started with fear-mongery, if you don't do this, you'll get this.
Yeah.
So to prevent this, we have to do this. And I'm speaking in code, but I'm sure we'll understand. So at first, it starts with fear and intimidation, and when that did not work, but now they're coming out bare knuckle. And they're basically saying, if you want to get forward with life, if you want to have, big money, like the real, because BlackRock is big money, yeah?
It is big money.
Yes, biggest money, yeah?
Look,
yes.
this BlackRock guy, his company has over $10 trillion in management. It's only US and China that have GDPs that big. So he has the guts to speak that
I think
arrogantly.
BlackRock and Vanguard, or
Vanguard, yes.
I think the biggest money.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Big money.
But now they're coming out bare knuckle.
Yeah.
And of course, some when we look at Uganda, for example, as a nation, and we look at where our economy is, people kind of still think that this is it's over a few hills and a few oceans, but we don't understand that they've started to infiltrate subtly. So I had a privilege of being part of the first interparliamentary conference on family values and culture. And we had people from all over the region coming to discuss one thing. And this is one of the behavioral change, the subtle behavioral change. But if you refuse, then they also come for you. And this was the comprehensive sexual education curriculum that they wanted to introduce to all the schools, not only within Uganda, but within the East African community. And remember, now we've grown past Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. Now we also have South Sudan. Yeah, we have more members that are joining us. And that the denominator, the outcry was that we're being told that they have grants to give for women businesses.
Grants.
We have grants, to help with sustainable farming,
inclusion.
Yes. And all these things look sugar coated on top, but. Yeah. Even the people that were present from the various ministries, when we had people flying in from the US to expose and say, look, when you read the fine print of some of the T's and C's of these grants for investment, because remember, BlackRock is about investment, but you also look at education, you look at the medical sector, you look at, I think even oil and gas has been affected as well. Yeah. So all the sectors in the fine print, you have inclusion, there has to be inclusivity and inclusion. You have to have acceptance of things to do with climate change. I think that's the environment aspect of ESG. Yeah. Then you also have aspects of, things like acceptance of, like transgender.
What does inclusion mean?
Inclusion means that you go beyond what is the female and male nomenclature and allocation of gender as we know it by birth, the God-given. Yeah, so that's why in that short video, he said, you can call me he, she, or, non-binary, So the guy was confused, and equally Ugandans as well are like, we only know you either a girl or a guy. There is no in between, So they're trying to, they try to introduce this very subtly to be incorporated into our curriculum, where you had 15-year-olds getting contraceptives. I think there was an uproar about it. They also tried to introduce very, very terrible, things about abortion being available. They were trying to bring in aspects of accepting sexual gratification at any age, including sex for kids, condoms for children. It was part of the curriculum. They wanted
in
to
Uganda?
have, yes, this was part. If you saw the materials, now in Uganda, we have some of the material being distributed, but in countries like Kenya, there are books that show you how to do anal, things, and like they're so graphic, yeah, but these are things that would be taught from, I think, 4 years, yeah. Like you begin to indoctrinate children from a very young age to tell them that basically it's okay for someone older than you to have a romantic relationship with you, and anything that you'd like to use to pleasure is a right, whether it is an object or an animal or someone. So it's so diabolical, but it was being incorporated in a very subtle thing under the word curriculum. And on the top, it's about women's health, giving sanitary towels to girls in boarding schools.
Well, now listen, I'm blown away. Right?
Yeah.
Now, listening to all this, Mark, I'd like to come to you. Look, we're talking about organizations such as BlackRock behind these global agendas that have budgets, or rather money, available to them of up to about $10 trillion. We're talking about global organizations such as World Health Organization, etc. Now, the ultimate question is, what can we do as individuals? Because in my mind, when I think about, because earlier you talked about, thank God there was a remnant. Thank God we are the restraining power, right? Help me understand, I, Doreen, an individual, understand my responsibility in the face of these mega global powers that have all the money, that own the world, so to say, as BlackRock does. What's my responsibility in all this? What can we do? And in fact, before I get your thoughts on this, I'd love for us to watch a very short clip from the 2018 prophecy given by Prophet Elvis for the year 2020 in relation to what our role really is.
Remember what the angel said to you. He said that the people whom he has committed for these last days, speaking about you, he says, you shall be the dominant force. He said, you are the restraining power that is spoken of in 2 Thessalonians, the restraining power. And then he says that when salt loses its saltiness, it's worthless. But because of the salt and the light that you are, and that you have maintained, you are that restraining power. And because you are that restraining power, there is restlessness in the kingdom of darkness. And they cannot pass anything just because of you. They just cannot run the world, run the nation down into darkness just because of you. You see, they are wishing and praying that you didn't exist, because you are that force that restrains evil from running rampant.
Mark, over to you. We are that force that restrains evil from running rampant. Evil that's being pushed by these mega corporations. How in the world do we do that? How does it look like practically?
The reason why you probably have an increasing outright or out there approach that they have as globalists, and whatever agenda they're pushing, it's that, that they will come and say it out in some of those spaces that they have, like in Davos, when they have the World Economic Forum and all these places, is because they have also mastered the art, first of all, of money. That, they will use their money to cajole you or to force you into doing what they want you to do. So you'll have countries that didn't really want to do lockdowns, but because they did them because they wanted the money. So they have the money and they will force you to do what they want you to do. They have the money, and of course, with the biggest percentage of the country, because they will talk about democracy, but we very well know that we have people talking about regime change, and there's nothing else that they're using but the money. So if you're in charge and you're not playing according to what they want, then they'll force regime change with the money. Now, the reason that goes on is because those that actually, like the prophecy of Prophet Elvis Mbonye talks about, those that are actually the restraining power, which is the Church of Christ, they have decided to take a backseat, and all they do is rhetoric, sour graping, and talking about some of these things.
Yeah.
But these guys come and talk about the real stuff that they are doing, their plans and everything in the open, and they back it with action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The biggest percentage of the church and the biggest percentage of people who are what Prophet Elvis Mbonye talks about as the restraining power are doing is to have conversations about this and lament, and they're in awe of the plans and the things that these people
And
are
fight
doing.
against each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you see,
Sibling
the thing is that
rivalry.
you see, the thing that amazes me about the globalists and all these people and their agenda is that they don't focus on the means, they focus on the goal, and that is beating the church.
Yeah.
That the means, they might have different ways they want to approach this thing. Some would actually look like they're fighting against each other, but their focus is on the goal. Whereas the church is focusing on the means rather than the goal.
Yeah.
And for me, it has always been that if you want to understand exactly who the person is, don't look at the means. Look at the end goal of what they are pursuing. Because, and that is how some people in the Church of Christ have ended up siding with one of the groups that seemingly groups in the globalist movement, because they seem to have a means that is acceptable to them, rather than looking at the goal.
The goal.
So you ask the question of what can we do as, the restraining power. She talks about the whole education and the system and everything. And you can say all you want to say. You can pray. You can have meetings and talk about these things. But at the end of the day, if your child is going to go to one of the schools that they are, they are funding and they are controlling, the end result is that you will lose that child to their agenda. So do we have the church actually getting down to serious business and not getting out of the four corners of the church and living the life out there?
Now, Mark, beyond the church,
Yes.
me, nyowe, even use the botanical way of saying nyowe.
Yeah.
I want to know what your role as Mark is, my role as Doreen. What can I do now before getting the church behind me? I need to know what we can do now at a practical level.
And for me, when I say church, really it's personal. It's not really like a congregation.
Okay.
When I say church,
Okay.
I'm talking about a Christian. Because if I am concerned about the education, then I have something to do about it.
Yes.
If it is starting a school that is on the foundation of the word of God, then and the principles of the kingdom of God, then that is my calling, and that's what I have to do, and go beyond just sitting and lamenting about some of these things. But also there are people that have been put in positions of power from the church, and that's what I'm talking about. That you look at the things that they are advancing and you wonder, are these Christians or not? So if you've been put in a position of power, are you able to counter some of these things that are being pushed? You know that the vaccines that are being pushed probably, for example, are not in the order of the freedom and the liberty that God gives us, but it is aimed at subjugation and control, and you just play along because you just want to be comfortable where you are.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a call in this day and age. Again, going back to the prophecy, that you're the salt. And he says specifically that you are the salt of the world. But remember, if salt loses its saltiness, it's worthless. So as a Christian, if God has really placed you in a particular position or in a place where you're able to decipher, see, and control and have an effect, and you do not do it, The Bible says, "Woe unto him
Yes.
who knows to do good but does not."
Doesn't.
Because that is sin to you. You see? And so for me, every other person it's incumbent on them to play their part and to know where you are and do what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
The difference that you're seeing and why most of the times, or seemingly most of the times, the agenda seems to have an upper hand is in focusing on the God rather than the means. That it's not about which church you go to, it's not about, God is really interested. And when you read Revelations, and God says the different churches, he writes to different churches,
7
I say
churches.
some of the churches have locked him out.
Yeah.
So some people are in different denominations and praising the denominations they are at the expense of the God, which the God is the kingdom of, of God, and not just how I dress or how I minister or how the other different church sings or how they dance, or at the end of the day is the kingdom of God.
Yes.
And so as a Christian, my role or my hand and what I have to do is to advance the kingdom of God. To make sure that everything that I am aligning with, or everything that I am accepting, or whoever I am listening to and I am heeding, is within line with, my belief system and, the things that I treasure most.
Yeah.
And that is the most important.
But I have to say, though, in order for us to do that, it starts by us knowing our true identity, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
that's
Absolutely.
And knowing our purpose, that we're here to not just take care of our immediate family, but to advance an agenda, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? Now, Evelyn, tell me how that looks like in your field.
Well, a few things. First
Yeah.
of all, I feel like I like Mark has said, there is the goal and then there's the means. Yeah. So it's kind of like driving a car. When you're driving a car at night, you need both full lights and dim lights, and you keep flicking them, back and forth between dim and full to be able to know where you're going, but to know also at the step that you are to gauge how far or how close you are to where you're going. And I believe that the foresight of prophecy is what gives us the destination. So it is so important to have a prophetic voice like Prophet Elvis Mbonye, and we are so privileged. I wouldn't want to be in Russia when Prophet is here, So we are so privileged to host such an anointing. And my first role as Eva is to make known that there is that prophetic voice, because that is where the destination is painted long before you understand the means. Like what he said in 2018, it looked outlandish at the time, but now with hindsight, we look back and we're like, oh, so those were the means, so this is how it would crystallize, how it would play out. So that's the first important thing. Secondly, of course,
And a prophetic voice, like he said, which is very non-denominational.
yes, that is true.
Covers
That
all of
is
us.
very true.
And to
Yeah.
interject in, you see, for me, earlier on I said the way that the globalist movement is able to, what they capitalize on is either predict the future or
Or
create
make it, yeah.
Now you have, in Prophet Elvis Mbonye, you have someone who is on record and has, everything is clear. You can go online, you can go to his YouTube channel, and you will see some of these things. Record that the prophecies he has given over years, hundreds, that have come precisely, some of them that are
fulfillment.
out of this world. You could not even imagine it, and have come to pass exactly as he has said them. Now that's someone who can actually predict the future for you, and you can bank on it. Because some of the
And it's
things
actually
have
more
been
than a
out of this
prediction,
world.
he'll-
Yeah. So for me,
Yeah.
I'm coming from the angle of, even if you didn't want really to
acknowledge. Yeah.
but you can look at it and say,
Yeah.
this man really predicted the future. But not only that,
Yeah.
the fact that some of the things that he has said, I've seen the future and it plays out like this and like this. And he says, I don't want it to play like that.
Very
And he's able to change it.
change
Now,
it.
what you have the globalists do is either they create the future in a certain way that they can control, or predict it and have from the background try to work on how it will work out, and then they work out how to control it before any unsuspecting people
Yeah.
find out how it's going to play out. But here you have someone who can predict the future, one, tell you what the tomorrow is going to be like, but also not only that, he's able to change it as it is. So if you can listen, if you can have, like she said, rightly so, it is a game changer. You have something that is very unique. You have in Prophet Elvis Mbonye, you have something that is very unique. And it doesn't matter, even if it were to go to diplomacy and world events and global politics and everything, you have someone that is, you can rely on, even like for a nation, for diplomacy. And you know who to get in touch with, who to be, you know, to ally with, which side to go, and all this. So, sorry for...
No, it's okay. I think you have some really good points. Brought the point home. Because prophecy has that dimension of foresight and foreknowledge, but there's also forthsaying. Not just foresight, but changing the future by words. Because like the Bible says, words are spirit. Jesus said, my word is spirit. When you have a genuine prophet who's come onto the scene, he has a track record like Prophet Elvis does. And that does not mean that we're throwing stones at other men of God, but rather we are giving honor where it is due. And since we have Prophet Elvis right here in Uganda, and he has changed the course of the asteroid, for example, let's say, by simply prayer. And you know, just a few degrees off tangent meant it missed the earth. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here right now. We'd be in the presence of the Lord. But that is a wonderful thing for us to note. And my first responsibility as Eva is to be that perfume that goes around telling people, by the way, we're all pharmacists, we're all medics here. We have a degree of leverage when it comes to collaborating with God in helping people get better. But ultimately, we need to realize that our resources and our collective intellectual quotient is limited, because we only can and we can only tweak what is in the body. But the thing that animates the body is spirit. So we have to get past the traditional, let's say, mindset of professionalism, and get to realize that there's actually powers, there's the power of God beyond us, resident in all professions, including medicine. And I've tried to approach my colleagues. I've had a lot of them not too enthusiastic about it, but I know that they'll get to a point where they'll find themselves in a corner, and the Lord will bring to their remembrance that there's actually a man who can minister to their issue, and that will be the turnaround. The second thing for me that I would take as an action point as Eva is in the area of legislation. In the book of Daniel, we see that in Daniel's time, Daniel had a position where he was influential with the legislative systems at the time. They did not have a democracy, they had a theocracy, where they had a king and he had subjects, and Daniel held a high position, Now, Daniel was able to influence things from the legislative standpoint, okay? And interestingly enough, when you look at, in 2 Kings, when you look at Elisha the prophet, and Prophet Elvis Mbonye is in the order of Elisha. When you look at that order of prophets, Elisha dealt with kings. He was dealing with Jezebel and Ahab. Okay? So when you look at legislation for a nation or for continents, then you have to have a caliber. You have to identify a caliber of prophet that can influence or give you insight on the legislative procedures in a nation. That is not to say that other prophets do not have their place, but it is to understand and come to the place of maturity that if we're dealing with leaders at global level, we're looking at technocrats, kings in their own right, then we need somebody who has an anointing of a caliber to influence there. Because in the book of Daniel, it says that when the spirit of the Antichrist is come, he will change times and laws. So the changing of the times and laws, yes, this was one of the visions that Daniel was shown, and he was shown that he will try and take away the prayer time. There's a specific time of prayer during the day, and basically to wear out the saints. And we see all of that in the globalist trends, subtle or overt. Yes. So they're working through a lot of legislations, and they give justification with things like ESG, environment, social justice and gender. And they talk about, it's good for investment, it's good for our economies to utilize the resources that we have, to have better transport and infrastructure. And they give very flattering statements and visions. But behind that, the way that they put it in place is through legislations. There are pockets of opportunity for every child of God to have an influence in the legislative system. Usually when a bill is being adopted and to be passed into law, they call what is known as stakeholders meetings. Yeah. So in every profession, if it's, for example, let's say the GMO bill, genetically modified organisms bill, that is in the area of healthcare, human and veterinary. We need to keep our ears open onto the ground. And you can even go on the internet. You'll find there are so many meetings that are happening in various hotels, Mestil, Protea. You'll find meetings, they're booked for meetings, and these are stakeholder meetings for National Drug Authority, stakeholder meetings for Ministry of Economics Development Planning. You'll find that they're discussing, be a part of the conversations.
Be a part of the conversation,
Yes.
stakeholder meet. Now, Mark, in just 1 minute, what would you tell that person who says, you know what, that's a lot of work. I have a lot of things to focus on. I'm not really interested in politics. Why is it important for them to be aware of what this agenda is and for them to participate, as Evelyn is telling us?
It goes back to where we started. Because what the globalists again bank on is the fact that they're trying to show you that your life is easier with their agenda. So, but in the long run, how easy it becomes or it looks and how soft for you it seems is the undoing, actually, that the globalist movement brings. Because you see, you'll hear something like the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, that is being rolled out in different places.
Sounds so good.
Sounds very good. But if you want to understand what it could mean, you then look at how communication had been shifted to just before the lockdown and the COVID nonsense. You look at how communication had been shifted to social media, and how the tech companies, the social media companies were able to regulate conversation. If you did not agree, or communication you did not agree to toe their line of words and what they wanted. The narrative. If you did not accept the narrative, then you're off. And it was a coordinated move. So if you're off these social media groups, then they say, if you have a business, we will boycott your business. Then, probably like companies, different companies would blacklist you. You will not fly. You will not go to some restaurants. You will not get credit. It's what will happen. So if you do not agree with the people that are controlling the digital currency, then they can lock you out. So you won't buy. You won't have anything. It is easy, yes, at the beginning, but you're giving away your liberty for something very simple. That is where the problem is. That if you feel like that's too much work, someone else will do it. It's that you're giving away your liberty. Liberty is not given; it's fought for. You have to fight for it. You have to fight, because every other person, naturally, people will want to subjugate others. So for you to get that freedom, you have to fight for it. And for me, the quote that comes to my mind is, I read somewhere, I think, and it says, sometimes you have to be the lion so that you can be the lamb that you want to be. You have to go out there and fight so that you have that space and that freedom that you want to enjoy, that peace. For you to have that peace, you have to sometimes be that lion that goes out and fights to defend that space that you have. For you to be able to enjoy that moment as a lamb.
And I think now we're at a place where we can't even say that, 2020, we had a real virus. What these guys are talking about are just conspiracy theories. No, there's a lot of...
It's worse, actually.
Sorry?
Because it's worse. Because you see, 2020 also for them showed them the loopholes in some of the things that they wanted to the social engineering that they were trying to carry out. Now what you have is a more subtle and a more dangerous agenda. So you have a rollout of all these programs, you have vaccines that you cannot explain why really they're being given. I am not a medical person, she is. And all these strategies that are being shipped out, and financing and money being channeled in a particular way, and the way of life being engineered in a particular way, so that, you know, if you do not rise up and say, no, education shouldn't be this way.
Yeah.
Children shouldn't be learning these things. And of course, it goes back to the whole idea of people who think about themselves and it's just about them and themselves. You know, if you do not work for a better society, if you do not work for, and that the better society is, the definition is clear on who created man, and, you know, it is clear. If it is against God, it is against society.
Yes, and these agendas have physical impact on us. If you look at the statistics, say of the household incomes that were lost in 2020, right? Over 699 billion lost every single month. Our kids did not study for 2 whole years.
Lost to who? Lost to who?
Lost to who? Tell us.
Question.
That's a very good question.
That's the question. Because you say income was lost, and lost to who? And that's why you see the rise of the super billionaires who are
Where did the money
in line
go?
with
Yeah.
the people who are now telling you, if you want funding, you have to do this.
Yeah.
You have to drive EV. You have to get off fossil fuels. You have to environmental and social and inclusion and all these things.
Yeah.
It's the people, and that goes to what we say. You know, they engineer a future that they know they will leverage.
Yes.
And because of that, and of course, when you she made a reference to Daniel, but when you also go to look at Joseph after the dream, he sees the future, and he knows that the future is going to be hunger. And he says to buy land from these people, let's cultivate, keep the food. They'll be hungry. They'll sell to us the land.
Now, I have to say, though, as we conclude our discussion, to your point of Joseph seeing the future, being under a seer, and you don't have to abandon wherever you are, your religion or spirituality. It's important to acknowledge a seer, a prophet who sees beyond the facade of what's being played out. But I have to say, though, in 2020, when Prophet Elvis was interviewed on BBC, right? Now, this was at the height of COVID.
Yeah.
People were dying. I, too, was scared, despite being under a prophet. Now, in that interview, he said, you know what? Now, to really paraphrase him, he advocated for the opening of churches and people worshiping.
Yeah.
I have to be honest, though. I kind of didn't agree with him. I was like, what? Prophet? People are dying. But now, because I was aware of what, first of all, the evidence that's all over in relation to the track record of prophecies from him that have been fulfilled, and therefore his credibility as a man who sees beyond the facade, I said, you know what? Then what he's saying is actually true. There must be something more than the bag that's going on. Hence the importance of opening up the church spaces and all. Now, as we conclude, I'd love for the two of you to have your parting shots. What should people know about this agenda, and what can we do as we close?
There's a point I had wanted to add to my earlier submission in addition to the legislation aspect.
Yeah.
There are some legislative instruments that are being proposed or have actually been pushed onto the front line within Uganda, within East Africa, that there is still room to challenge. And I'll leave that just the way it is. But if we do some research, there's a lot of bills that have been tabled, and some bills have been passed into law. But if you do have friends who are lawyers who can take you through, and you have an interest, we have Mark here. And he'll actually tell us that there's a lot that can be challenged to be overturned, and there's a grace for that, I believe, in our time. But in addition to that, as a medical worker, I remember in the post-COVID and COVID area, I was so thankful for Dr. Gwang Patrick and for his innovation with COVIDX. And when I had a chance to interview him and speak to him, he actually professed hearing the voice of God telling him to use the formula to treat a friend of his, a European man who was going to die here from COVID. He had the innovation registered with National Drug Authority almost 3 to 5 years prior to that. But he did not know that it would work in that line. So it brings me to my next point. I'm advocating for innovation among children of God. And we may think, I have this formula, and for us mainly, maybe because of financial constraints and also because of availability of a diversity, a beautiful diversity of plant life around us. We have a lot of raw material that has not been adulterated the way it has been in Europe and in other parts of the world. Now, it's very easy to start, I would say, tinkering around with certain innovations. They may not necessarily be like what Dr. Ogwang did, but it may be, for example, with a social media platform that is not Facebook, that is not X. You see, if you can come up, and in the US and other places, teenagers are coming up with these things in their basements. They're not even having to go to school for it. Yeah. So I'm encouraging and advocating for innovation at all levels. And innovation can be, for example, coming up with new study material for schools, for preschoolers, for toddlers, for, textbooks that we get from overseas. Why can't we have our own, kind of material that also puts Bible verses at the bottom? It doesn't have to be, we don't have to think so complicated. The things of God are simple. And the voice of the Holy Spirit comes in a whisper. Yeah. So if we have innovations to present, by the time the globalists maybe would want to roll something out, and they say, okay, there is a disease that affects A, B, C, D, you already have something, and the Lord taps you and says, that thing which you did and used for your household, it actually works against this. So I'm advocating for innovation, and it's actually a spirit of creativity that was in the Bible upon Bezalel, Aholiab, and it's available for every child of God. If you feel like you cannot step out there into the legislative spaces because maybe you're timid, or you could be giving excuses like Moses saying, I stammer, you may be the one who maybe can innovate something at home and give God something to work with. God can only use something that's existent. A million blessings times zero innovation equals zero. Yeah, but God can multiply something small as it is. So with prayer and with inspiration with God, like you've said, yes, what do you have in your hand? Like he told Moses. Dr. Guang had something in his hand to use. And after that, so many people started to awaken and say, oh yeah, we also have a formula for COVID. We have a formula for this. And by the time Ebola showed up, people already had things to use, you see. So I would like to encourage that among us. Let us be open-minded, and those of us who have a grace of boldness to step out and challenge the legislations, we need to knacker that from the top. Then those who are at home, and maybe you're a housewife or a cleaner, or you're like a teacher somewhere, and you diminish in some way your contribution, I'd like to call that to a stop and get you to realize that there's nothing small. Yeah, a human being comes from a sperm. You can't see it. So when it comes to minuteness of your abilities and what God can make you to be, we need to stop diminishing what God has placed in our hands and begin to use that to innovate and give God something, a weapon to use when the call of war is sounded. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Thank you, Evelyn. Your turn, Mark.
For every person out there, one thing you have to understand is that there's a price to pay for everything that seems free in this world. And Jesus Christ put it this way. He said, my yoke is light. Every person is bound. You decide who's going to bound you.
True.
Every man is bound.
I like that.
You choose. And that's why Jesus said, my yoke is light. Because he brings liberty. You understand? So there are those that will bind you and take away your liberty. But it seems there's a way that seems, right to a man, but its end is destruction. It seems free. It seems high sounding and intelligent and everything. I mean, we talk about the US as it is today. And every other person need to know out there that the US didn't get to the point where President Trump is doing what he's doing overnight. And it came from a point where, for me, when I realized that a superpower, a nation like the US, has descended to discussing bathrooms. Whether if I'm born male and I become female, should I go
And it's such an issue.
And it became an issue in the world, and you are the superpower. You are calling the shots in the world, and you have been brought to your knees to have such a discussion. It's the one that is, and you look at the Biden administration and everything that was going on, and the appointments that he was making and the people that he was, you'd say that the guy was clearly making a case for nut jobs. You'd clearly see that the guy was just trying to normalize mental illness and to make it no more and not to say that but to glorify it, actually. To make it seem like it's actually the better thing,
to reset the culture.
So you've got to understand out there that no matter where you stand, truth is truth. It doesn't matter how someone tries to paint it. So we have a sure voice. We have some voice that you can bank on and say, I have seen results here. We've talked about it here. Just take off time and try to do as such. Because in and of yourself, ask yourself, I am comfortable, I have this, I have that. At the end of the day, if all those small petty things that you look at, I have a house, I have an extra car, I have this, I have an extra, whatever, even if it's a plane or whatever, at the end of the day, is that satisfaction? Does that really satisfy you?
Does that fulfill you?
Yes, because the people who are pushing the things that you think are high sounding have all these things, but they are still looking for something that you're jumping onto unknowingly. And then to the body of Christ, if you're a Christian and you're out there, can you get to a point where you do not look at the means, but the goal? Because the operation of a prophet is not going to be the same operation of a pastor. If you've been called to be a teacher, you shouldn't criticize the operation of an apostle.
True.
You should look at the goal, what the person is doing. The parable of the tares says it all.
What is their mandate?
Jesus said, let them all grow. Because the goal is the fruit. We
The
shall
harvest.
see them from the fruit. The harvest, what you bear at the end of the day. We can sit back and look at your means. I probably am not comfortable with the way you do your things.
True.
But what are you fighting for? That is the most important. And that should be the unifying factor in the body of Christ. It shouldn't be the means. It shouldn't be the looks. It shouldn't be the optics that you see today. But the goal of what is it that we are focusing on. And that should be the telling of any child of God. Your alliances, the people that you're aligning with, the people that you're working with, that should be the goal. If someone's goal is different from your goal, is different from the kingdom and the principles of the kingdom, that is an alliance that is going to take you to hell.
I love what all of you have said, and I think the undertone is how you beautifully put it. What are you fighting for? Right? We've got to fight for more than just our families, and it has to be about us leaving a legacy, isn't it? A legacy that far outlives us, right? And so I'd like to thank you so much for coming here. Such brilliant brains.
It's been a good time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, such brilliant brains. And I love for us to cap it all by reminding ourselves that this is a work of the Spirit, isn't it?
Yeah.
That regardless of how much money BlackRock has, there's none greater than God. So I think at the end of it all, it's really up to us to avail ourselves as vessels, isn't it? To know that all that God needs is a vessel where he can work and reveal these inventions that you are talking about and the legislations and the ways in which we can overcome these agendas that will or are having an impact on our individual lives, but also the lives of our children, this place that we're living in. We just cannot live for ourselves. So again, I'd love to thank our wonderful, amazing guests for gracing the circle of life today. And for you who might have been inspired by today's show, we are going to leave the links for the 2018, the prophecy given in 2018 about 2020 and these global agendas by Prophet Elvis Mbonye. We shall leave the links down in the description. But also another very important message we'd like to call on you to watch is one titled God's Secret Society, wherein the prophet specifically talks about your role as an individual in today's society. We will link that up in the description box. Yes. So thanks again for joining us, and we'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts? What are you doing? What are you fighting for? Thanks again for joining us, and have yourselves a very beautiful day.